So I was, for some reason, I chose two topics this fall that are really very fundamental. Last topic was integrity. This is about calm and rest, very fundamental to the practice. And very fundamental to rest in this tradition is beginning to create a sense of connection with what is concretely real in the moment. You know, if you think of animals, I mentioned animals and animal breathing in the meditation. Maybe picture a cat here. Cats are masters of this. They're masters of rest, aren't they? If you want to rest, you could possibly just imagine a cat. But occasionally cats are not at rest. If they're out in the yard and a dog comes by, you might see them suddenly change state, become hyper alert. And maybe if they're really threatened, their hair stands up on end. And so they go into this state of hyper alertness until the threat is past. And then they might do a little shaky thing. And the next thing you know, they're curled up somewhere, completely at rest again. Animals go through these states, these nervous system states, with great ease and don't get stuck there. So in other words, perhaps by the grace of the simplicity of their beings, when there's something to worry about that's right there in front of them, they're alert in that way. And if it's not right in front of them, they're not. We human beings are not quite given that capacity in the same way, because we have this complex ability to make things that aren't present through our imagination, through our mind. Our mind keeps inserting imaginary things into our experience. So the thing that's due at the end of the day has a presence all through as a kind of a threatening thing if it's something that you're working on that's you're not sure you're going to get done in time, or you're not sure it's good enough. There's all this sort of conceptual stuff around it. Maybe when it's finally done and you turn it in, like the cat, you relax. But we tend to have these things going on over multiple days and weeks, and sometimes endlessly. We have things that are ongoing, some of which have a bit of an anxious charge to them. And so we tend to carry those like a sack of something on our shoulders. This, this felt sense of the things that we have to do. So really, step one, when it comes to meditation, is to begin to find our way back to here and now. Find our way back to the present moment. And the best way to anchor that is with the body. The body is always present. I mean, there are certain circumstances when it's not. We're not going to work with that, with dreams or, trance states or dissociation. But the body, if you come out of the head enough, is there right there to be noticed. And it has sensations all over the place. So it becomes really the primary ground for our ability to rest in this practice. It becomes our entry point back into the state of rest. And it is kind of artificially becoming an animal, if you will, in the way that animals don't have so many complex things going on in their minds, as far as we know. I don't know what my dog actually thinks about maybe there's more complex things going on than I know. But for the most part, I see the ability to rest deeply and to be in the present moment. And we've lost that. So our practice is really about coming back to that ground. And so when I think of meditation practice, I think of ground as a kind of threesome, which we'll talk about in this class. There's the body, the sensations of the body. There's the breath, which is also a sensation of the body, but it has special qualities that makes it worth kind of separating out into a separate category. And there's the literal ground, which is present to us also through the body. But I find it to be a really powerful tool for coming to rest. You know, the ground is what we walk on, obviously. And so it's present with every step. It's present with all of our movements are in relationship to this earth that we inhabit. And so a part of being an animal, a part of coming back into the sensate consciousness of an animal is this orientation to gravity, this orientation to ground. And of course, if you want to rest, one of the things people do is they lay down. They lay down and they let gravity have them, you know, which is also letting the bed or the floor or whatever one is on, the mat, kind of hold you, support the body, and let the body just sink into it. There's a yogic practice of yoga nidra, yogic sleep, where one systematically relaxes parts of the body by tensing them and then relaxing them, tensing them and relaxing them, in order to come to a deeper place of rest. It's a great practice. I'm not going to be teaching it in this class, but it's a great practice. But sometimes when one is meditating, when one chooses meditation as a way to find rest in the moment, laying down is an option. Laying down is a legitimate posture for meditating. Why is it not used as much as it could be used? Well, it has some disadvantages, obviously. When you lay down, you're very likely to fall asleep if you're tired, you know? It's this posture that we use to fall asleep. And so relaxation may kind of take over in a way that leads to a nap. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not really what we're intending to do if what we're practicing is meditation, which is about presence, not just about relaxation. But it's an excellent posture to choose if you're upset about something. If your mind is like, it might be a way to bring yourself down. It's also a posture for if you're in pain, where you can relieve that pain, and somebody who's in pain is less likely to fall asleep. That pain kind of keeps them awake, but perhaps lying down is a posture that will let them relax the most. So that's a legitimate posture. Sitting is often preferred. Why? Well, first of all, sitting is like laying down. You can really kind of let go into gravity. Our bodies really in the West have a disadvantage in this way. If we really grew up sitting on the floor, as do many cultures, our muscles would be stretched out. We'd be comfortable on the floor. And in some ways, you know, to be able to cross your legs and sit on the floor, have the tailbone right down, you can sit in a very comfortable way with the spine erect and really find a place of rest in sitting. In chairs, it's a little different. Sometimes in order to actually use the chair the way it was meant, we can't actually sit straight. We have to sit back. We have to kind of curl the spine. We lose some of the energy of being able to support the weight of your own spine, which you could easily if you could cross your legs and sit on the floor and do that comfortably. I once was in India and sat for a yajna. You may not know what that is, but it's a Hindu practice using of sacrifice. It's called a sacrifice. No animals were harmed in this thing. It's actually a sacrifice using mantra, prayers, ghee, and barley, I believe. There's a grain. And so these pundits, which included a whole bunch of 14-year-olds, which he included because I was there, they thought it would be a thrill for them. They were learning to be pundits. They were learning to be this. And so they sat for 7 hours, pretty much, on the floor, just a cloth, and chanted at the top of their lungs. It was amazing. But they had found a way, a comfort in their body to do that. And I didn't notice at the end of it, when they got up, that they were like hobbling away. Some of the older ones, maybe, yes, were a little stiff getting up, but then didn't seem to suffer after that. It was kind of an eye-opener to me, who, had very great difficulty sitting on the floor. My knees don't quite work right. Now having hip problems on the right side. Anyway, it's complicated. Even sitting in a chair is somewhat complicated. So just finding a resting posture. Sitting is a pretty good choice. It has the advantage of having more energy. You're sitting up. You're not necessarily so suggestive to sleep, though if you lean back, against something, in that way, you may find that sleep comes because you're not generating the energy that you would just being in line with gravity. And then walking or standing is also a legitimate posture. You can stand. It has much more energy. It's because we're talking about rest. We're not going to talk about that too much here, but a little bit, because it's important. See how I can put this. Okay, if you imagine the cat, there's a cat in rest, there's a cat in high alert. Human beings have a third state. I think animals can have this state too if they're abused, if they're put in situations of confinement where they cannot escape some sort of threat or some sort of harm. They too can start to look like human beings in this respect. But there's a shock kind of state that human beings go to that might look like rest. And it's also possible to be in that state for years, not just temporarily. If you've had trauma, maybe nothing in your life even qualifies as trauma, but there's a shut down state that human beings can kind of go into. And I suspect that most people, by the time they are an adult, have places in their nervous system that are shut down, that we've kind of shut something down, put it out of consciousness, lost energy. If you think of the kind of energy that young children have, and then you think of an adult, you might understand why I talk about adulthood sometime as a semi-shut down state. It's true, as adults, we operate at a different energy level, and obviously we're not going to have the energy that a 5-year-old has. But I think there's a further drain on our energy. These places have shut down. And so when you start a meditation practice, the more energetic postures are really helpful for helping us to come out of places of shutdown. So those energetic postures are standing and walking. The reason is, by raising the energy, in order to get from shutdown to true rest, you usually have to pass through something that is more aroused, like the cat who's threatened by the dog, though not that extreme. It could be quite subtle. So if you've ever done walking meditation on an intensive silent retreat, and those of you who are coming, by the way, to the winter retreat will get your chance to do this, there's something about the walking that it raises energy. And many times when I'm walking and I'm really doing the practice with a great deal of sort of integrity and doing the walking for the whole walking period, which is hard sometimes because your mind gets tired after 10 or 15 minutes and you want to go do something else. If you actually just walk back and forth for the walking period, it's not uncanny for me to start feeling irritation about something that's happened recently or a long time ago. It's like that extra energy kind of unlocks this place of fiery energy, we'll call it. Anger is probably the emotion most people identify, but I like sometimes to just call it fire. Sometimes you got to get your fire back if you're coming from a place of shutdown. Depression is a place of shutdown, for example. It's a particular form of that. It's important to get your fire back. And once you have your fire back, you can then truly rest. You can come to rest. So in order to not be too lethargic and just go into a kind of stupor, if you do an intensive meditation retreat, you go between sitting and walking to kind of balance your energy. And but there are times when you might choose a higher energy posture. For instance, I find I do a lot of my work now by computer, and my mind at the end of the day is so dull. There's a kind of a glaze that starts to happen. I feel sorry for my wife, who sometimes, I come out to dinner and she's ready to talk to me, and I'm sort of like, it can be really helpful to do a period of walking meditation when your mind is really dull. Now, that's kind of counterintuitive because you're tired. Dullness is a kind of a tired state. And you think, oh, I'll just sit down or check out. We practice in this country many forms of checking out. One of the biggest one is the TV. That when we're tired, when we're kind of burnt out from what we've been doing all day, we look for something to zone out in. And I'm not saying that that's bad, and I don't want to make that wrong, but there are choices to be made that might be better in terms of real rest. And so a period of walking meditation or standing meditation, which consists of just standing, closing your eyes, feel the breath a little bit, but mostly you do a body scan from the feet up, a slow body scan from the feet up. And then you can do it again and just stand there at rest and do the body scan. Can actually raise a certain kind of energy that will allow you to feel a different sort of calm after that. Many people do this who like go for a run after work or do some yoga. I mean, that's kind of the higher state of let's get the body working. Let's create something like an aroused state, something like the cat out on the the front porch with the dog going by, and that allows a deeper state of rest. People have discovered that. So rest does not necessarily, I mean, in my sense, in the sense of this tradition, which is trying to find a balanced state of consciousness, which is alert and at rest. Looking for that, just kind of zoning out is not that. Okay. It may give you, in some sense, what you need at the end of the day. But we're looking for an alert, relaxed state of consciousness as kind of the place we're talking about in rest. So, we may talk at some point in this class about getting to sleep. That's relevant, but it's not exactly where I'm headed with this topic. Because certainly, I mean, another thing about rest is that we work way too hard in this culture. We push ourselves way too much. And one of the evidences of that is the drug of choice is caffeine. I once read, actually I quite recently read Michael Pollan's book, Your Mind on Plants. I don't know if any of you have read that. The middle chapter is on caffeine. It was really interesting. And he talked about, and I've heard this before, but he refreshed my memory on the way that caffeine was introduced to the West, sort of along with capitalism and the whole modern economy. And the shift from an agricultural economy to an industrial economy, and the need for people to work at factories for a long period of time, work at desks, all of the sorts of things we do is kind of unusual in human history that so many of us do it. And so caffeine was introduced at that, that point, and even the coffee break became like an institutionalized and legalized part of work life because people needed to stay awake. It was dangerous to be at machines without, when one was drowsy and so forth. So, but what I find the effect, when I have caffeine is that I feel like something's always kind of like pushing my nervous system. I feel that push all the time. And of course, caffeine is addictive. And so often, and I say this as somebody who has drunk coffee, I've come off of coffee. But I remember kind of like waking up and that was like the best thing and the first thing was to like get that coffee and sit down with it. You may hear yourself in what I'm talking about. That way that suddenly you want to get that push because as an addictive substance, the push always comes with something that has to like get a deficit. So you wake up in the morning actually in a deficit of energy because of the push that you had from the coffee, and you need that push again to get back to where you were. So there's this sort of seesaw effect. It's also affecting your sleep. I read about that as well. So we have this sort of relationship with our lives where we are usually pushing ourselves a little bit with an actual substance. We're kind of like pushing ourselves. It sometimes feels like the world actually demands it of us, that we couldn't actually keep up if we weren't on the substance. I think that's a little bit of what's called stinking thinking. It's the coffee speaking. Then, in fact, if you completely come off it and you do so for a number of days, your natural energy comes up in a certain way. And it's not so easy, not so hard to keep up with people, but you do notice, as somebody who maybe isn't on caffeine, I do green tea, I will admit, in the morning. There is a kind of a rushing that's constantly going on. And it's just a part of the culture. So anyway, rest. What I encourage you to do this week is, whether you're new to meditation or you've been doing this a long time, and so a lot of what I'm saying this first class is going to sound familiar to those of you who've been doing meditation practice for a long time, coming back to the body, coming back to the breath. But believe me, it's this kind of 101 Buddhism that is what we need to keep being reminded of, is that the space of here and now is where we will find rest. And the way to anchor ourselves in here and now, when the mind has this tendency, and I think caffeine makes it worse, to be out in this sort of ideational world all the time, where we're creating realities with our mind, our ideation of situations we need to account for, and prevent happening, and past situations we're thinking about and have feelings about. And so we live in this whole world of ideation all the time. And so we need to develop a practice of coming out of that, even if it's just a short time every day. And, perhaps you've heard testimonials from others, or you have your own testimonial. Even just doing 20 minutes a day makes a difference in terms of your ability to come back to here and now as you go through the day, and to develop a margin of calm. If you are willing to practice for 20 or 30 minutes a day, I think you'll notice a change. You'll notice different kind of experience as you go through your day around the rest that you bring into it, even if you have a very busy day. And so I'm not asking you to not have a busy day. Most of us have busy days. And when, at some point, I would encourage you to think about maybe if your day is too busy, changing your lifestyle. And we may talk about that later in this class because it's really a thought worth entertaining. But without necessarily changing your lifestyle, begin to give yourself the space to have a regular meditation practice. I know some of you do. I know some of you would like to. Let this class be your chance to begin to ground that. And we're going into a season which I find particularly busy. It's busy socially. It's busy also just, I don't know, there's just a lot going on. And so this might seem like a poor chance to establish a meditation practice, but it's actually, when you're busy is actually the most important time to establish a meditation practice. And few people take my advice on that. Usually, I'm too busy to meditate is the kind of excuse that people give. But what that's actually saying is, boy, I could really use meditation. I could really use a chance to slow down and give the nervous system an experience of rest. So what I propose, what I suggest, and obviously there's no demand here. If you can't do it, you can't do it, is really establish your practice, this course, and find a time of day that you're going to do it. And I don't think it will happen unless you find a time of day, unless you actually know when you wake up in the morning when it's going to happen. It very rarely happens. It just has never worked that way for me. And I suspect most people are like that. It needs to have a time. And choose a time which is good for you. My time is first thing in the morning. I wake up pretty clear-headed. A lot of people don't. They're not morning people, as the saying goes. So if there's another time of day, a break at work, midday, generally it's better before a meal than after a meal. A few people, it doesn't seem to matter whether they've just eaten, but for most people it does. Tends to make the mind sleepier and the head cloudy. Just find your way with it and begin that sense of rest. And and maybe I haven't emphasized in other classes as much as I am today about the relationship with ground, with gravity, the relationship with touch points, of actually feeling the body touching whatever it's touching in order for you to sit, and feeling your relationship with gravity. That too has a great kind of impact on us psychologically to come out of the sort of arousal that states that we're in to actually rest, that sort of relationship with gravity. So in your practice, begin that, and we'll take it from there. There's a lot to be said on this topic.